lost my place here. So Mr. Keegan didn't forget. He knows who he is. Mike is CEO of TNS. He's also on the CCA board, and we're so glad to have him. He also is partnering with CCA in the data access hub that we created several years ago that many of our members already participate in. But Mike's going to talk a little more about something that every consumer in the United States seems to have on the top of their mind, and you know what? On robocalls, and I was to set it up. I mean, a lot's going on in D.C. We have Congress in a bipartisan frenzy. A few weeks ago, we had a 97-1 vote on the Senate floor on the Trace Act, saying, "Hey, we need a robocall solution." The House of Representatives just last week, 429-3. I mean, have you seen such numbers recently for coming out of the U.S. Congress? The FCC has been also extremely busy with regulatory rulings, NPRMs. They did a call authentication summit, which you participated in. Yeah. And I mean, this is pretty powerful stuff. I mean, what it looks like is if others can't figure this out, we're headed to a pretty significant mandate. So it's not easy as it sounds. It's pretty complicated stuff. So could you tell us about your participation in the summit? And also, you just had a recent report that came out, and throw some of that in there. And then we can talk about the declaratory ruling and what that means.
Sure. First, I want to thank everyone for having me. I also want to thank Steve for putting me behind a Bell Labs fellow and a guy who's authored 54 patents and talking about smart fabric. I still, on a daily basis, wonder whether or not I should buy polyester or cotton.
Well, I noticed that both of them were born in New Jersey, so I figured it didn't matter.
So minus that, getting to the topic at hand, you know, there's been a lot of action in D.C. recently. Maybe if we take a step back, I think it all started really in 2017 when the commissioner did a ruling that addressed certain types of calls that he authorized could be blocked, but didn't require them to be blocked by carriers associated with this topic of, you know, nuisance and high-risk calls. Those calls are, you know, numbers that come from a do not originate list or area codes that didn't exist, right? So it was the beginning of a dialogue with the government as the spam and robocall problem was occurring at that time, but was becoming more significant. This year, there's been a lot of focus on it, as you said, Steve. It's important to kind of understand where we are and also understand that there's nothing been passed yet that requires a carrier to do anything. So that's the key that we should all understand today. That being said, a lot of carriers are proactively addressing the problem, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, as you talked about, you know, the Trace Act was passed by the Senate, and the creatively entitled Stop Bad Robocalls Act was passed by the House. And both of them, you know, the bills are ultimately going to have to be reconciled, but both of those acts, if passed and signed, will ultimately create a bill that gives more enforcement authority to the FCC, but it also pushes the FCC to do rulemaking on areas like stir shaking and data analytics and what you can block and how do you create safe harbors for the carriers. Following that, probably the most significant action that was taken in June of this year when the FCC came out and expanded upon its ruling in 2017 and provided other areas where carriers they were authorized but not required to block. So there were two areas there. One was opt-in. Essentially, a consumer could opt in and say, if the number is not in my contact list, then block it. That's a consumer-driven decision. The other decision was based upon reasonable analytics. If it was a high-risk call, then you could block it at a network level, meaning that you blocked it and the call never went to the phone, so it never rang there, and then the call could be pushed to voicemail or it could do other things. Now, that obviously created some issues, right? The issues are, what about legitimate enterprises that are getting blocked, right? How ultimately do you educate the consumer on, you know, the options that they have out there? How it's an opt-out, you know, provision. How do they ultimately deal with that? So getting your point, in July of this year, they had a robocall summit. The FCC held a robocall summit, and they addressed a number of these issues, which is important. The takeaways from that summit that are important for this group are, one, if Congress doesn't act in the back half of the year, you can be sure that the FCC is going to act in the first quarter, right? What that ultimately entails is still being worked out, so we're going to have to keep our eye on that. The other piece of it was, I know there's been a lot of talk about STIR/SHAKEN, and all the carriers kind of concluded, and some of them are in this room, that STIR/SHAKEN is not the silver bullet for solving the problem. And we are actually seeing bad actors move away, actually put in place different programs, for instance, moving more towards toll-free numbers that are not addressed in the STIR/SHAKEN framework, so they're getting ahead. So data analytics or layered analytics coupled with STIR/SHAKEN is going to be the way we ultimately solve this.
So we talked about what carriers are doing right now.
Yeah.
We also know that the Congress and the FCC don't particularly think that consumers should pay any more for a solution on robocalls, which is pretty difficult for carriers to invest capital expenditures and not figure out a way to at least reimburse themselves for their costs. But a lot of it comes down to consumers. Now, one of the things I noticed in your report is that consumers want the choice. So what are the carriers doing right now, the tier ones and others that are leading the way, saying, what are they doing today that addresses this, and how much time is it going to take before you feel confident that analytics, the STIR/SHAKEN, and some of the techniques that are being used right now are actually going to bring that number down significantly?
Yeah, so I would say, driven by the 2017 ruling, tier one carriers and other carriers, to be fair, some in this room, have been working on advice on risk, essentially providing to their consumer the ability to see whether, or to determine whether or not they want to answer a call. So most of the tier ones have rolled out a free service that essentially, when the call comes in, meters the call and says it's a spam likely call, right? Those have been in the marketplace for the last couple of years. The algorithms behind that, like TNS's call guarded algorithm, have been built specifically to help the carriers be able to address the consumer. As you said before, a recent report that we did, an independent report, you can find it on our website, and everyone should look at it because it's got a lot of the statistics associated with the problem that we're addressing today. But it said that only 39% of consumers don't want to see spam and robocall. The majority of consumers want to have the choice to be able to either answer the call or push it to voicemail or make the determination about what they want to do with it. So getting back to the thing, tier ones, and some of the tier twos have been in the marketplace for a while addressing this issue. It's interesting. The question is whether or not it's been effective, right? Using data analytics to drive solutions in the marketplace. We just did, in that report, you'll find that only 12% of high-risk calls now originate from tier ones. In the past, that number was significantly higher.
On the mobile.
On the wireless side, yeah. So originate from tier one. So it's really important for everyone to understand that data analytics solutions are working in the marketplace today.
Okay, now, if you have an all IP network, STIR/SHAKEN works and your authentication regime works better, your analytics work. So what if you have TDM elements in your network? What's the issue?
It's interesting. The deployment of STIR/SHAKEN it's accelerated in tier ones, but it doesn't cover everything, right? So the way you're going at in an SS7 network, it's very difficult to deploy a STIR/SHAKEN solution. So, and it doesn't really have a framework again for toll-free, right? So I think you have to have a multi-layered approach, and this is where the FCC is going. You've got universal call blocking, which you can block calls at a network based upon rulings that have been made by the FCC that we just discussed. Some of those rulings may ultimately come into a safe harbor rule that the FCC pushes out later this year, the beginning part of next year. You can do advice on risk, which we were talking about before, which is data analytics, and then STIR/SHAKEN. right? Stir shaken will only be one of the three. The authentication of a call by stir shaken will probably be only one of the three elements that you'll want to incorporate into your service and your consumer approach as you move further. How do you deal with it today if you don't have an IP network and you haven't deployed stir shaken? Well, I think you focus on universal call blocking and you focus on data analytics. What you want to do is be able to give your consumer some protection against spam and robocalling, right? You don't have to deploy stir shaken to do that. There are other ways to get it
But
done.
as a carrier, does this mean that, hey, I got to go to a third-party entity to authenticate the call if I have a TDM network, to authenticate the call based on an IP, portal, and then transfer it to a TDM, to your TDM network? Or it seems to me that if it's a mandate, you got to figure out a solution.
Right.
And then the other side of it is, okay, so you are an all IP network, but you get traffic from a TDM switch. So that's coming into your network unauthenticated. There's no way of going back and authenticating. So what do you do in that situation when you may be 6 months, a year, or 3 years away from an all IP network opportunity to use the analytics that seem to be working?
Yeah, well, I think in that situation, you throw up your hands and you walk out of the room because you don't really know what's going on, right? But in the end, I think networks are at different stages of evolution, we've talked about, right? And what the FCC and the government wants to see, forgetting about how ultimately you implement stir shaken, because it's a complicated environment when you have TDM networks, you have IP networks, and how ultimately those are going to interact. What the FCC wants carriers to do is take steps. Right? And so going back to what we talked about before by a layered approach, you can take the steps before you roll out a stir shaken solution that provide the FCC and your consumer the comfort that you're dealing with the problem by either doing universal call blocking or using data analytics.
Now you go down there and meet with these guys all the time at the FCC and also in their task force. So what's going to be considered sufficient effort by the policymakers to say, hey, they're trying, they're working? Is there going to be a recognition that some of the smaller carriers or the carriers that have TDM in the network may not have a solution for a longer period of time?
It's a good question. I don't want to speak for the FCC on the sufficient piece because I think it's sand that's shifting right now. But I do think they're coming to the conclusion after going through the summit and hearing, the feedback from my team about the fact that we get it. Stir shaken is not, as I said before, the silver bullet, right? It's something that ultimately you should deploy if it's capable of being deployed, but ultimately using other solutions to attack the problem is really important.
Yeah, we've heard from a lot of our carriers that say, listen, this is not easy, especially when you're modifying your network in the middle of all this. So what's the best advice, the best tool that's out there right now, should you be in that transition stage of a TDM to IP or your all IP data and on the Volta you have to fall back to enhanced circuit switch 3D?
Yeah, look, I have my own opinion, which is the TNS call authentication hub is the right choice for you guys. But taking a step.
I wonder when we get to that.
You're trying to pull it out of me, but I don't want to make this a marketing message, right? But it's important to understand how ultimately you address the concerns and you do it quickly and efficiently. And our hub, and if you look at it, is a cloud-based solution that we deployed in April. That a number of carriers in this room have signed on today and are going to use it as their solution moving forward. That does provide all of the. It provides the data analytics from Call Guardian. Ultimately, it'll provide authentication for stir shaken through a partnership that we have with Metaswitch, and it also provides universal call blocking at a network level. Easy to deploy. It's a managed service. You don't have to staff up considerably to do it, and you can it ultimately is in the marketplace today. It has a portal associated with it because there's a number of things that you need to deal with. Some of them are false positives. So if you're blocking numbers that you shouldn't be blocking, or enterprises come to you and say that's actually a legitimate number, how do you ultimately mediate that position? So it's been thought out, it's been used by tier 1 carriers for years. We put it in the marketplace for more rural carriers today because it's important for us to address your concerns as well.
So if you're a consumer and says, listen, I don't want anybody calling me, or I don't want any phone number coming in that's not in my directory, my personal directory. Can a consumer ask the carrier to do that?
As long as they're enabled to do it, 100%.
Okay, and liability protections?
I would say in the end, you're pretty clean on that one, since the consumer has asked you to do it.
Yeah, and that's going to be a difficult issue because the consumer says, yeah, I want it all blocked, and then they got a very important call, say, coming in from their doctor telling them about something that's medical health related. They don't get it.
Yeah. So, it's all, they're all areas that Congress and the FCC are going to have to deal with. Being a former lawyer, I understand, where you're going with this, but I appreciate in the end that it's a complicated environment. Yeah. Liability rules and all of that. I think you've got to be smart when you're deploying, because a lot of carriers ask us these questions, and we always respond with giving the consumer the choice is the best way ultimately to move forward and protect yourself against liability, right? And I think the FCC would agree with that as well.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm a recovering lawyer myself, and so I appreciate the time and effort, and we thank you for working together with the small carriers to find solutions.
Great. Well, thank you for the time, and thank you guys for listening.
Thank
I appreciate
you. Hear it for Mike. Thank you, sir. Very good. Good job. Okay, now we have the answer to robocalling. I don't know if we're quite there yet as an industry, but tough. Now we're, let's see, where are we going now? We're going to, we did that. See, coming back and forth, I missed my notes. Okay, I want to remind everyone that this afternoon we have some excellent breakout sessions lined up. Hopefully you'll take part. CCA's events committee helped plan these sessions, and I would like to ask, I know they're not all here, but everyone in the CCA events committee, please stand up. We'd like to give you a round of applause. Thank you, Ken. Thank you. I don't think many of our members understand that these individuals spend at least 2 days of their life for 2 shows, sitting down and going through what are the most important issues, what are the challenges, what can we do to bring more educational opportunity and innovative ideas to all the membership. And they work really, really hard at it. They put the not only the program topics together, but they set up the moderators and the panels, and many times participate. And without them, I don't think our educational effort would be nearly what it is. So thank you, one and all. I want to remind everyone that this afternoon we have excellent breakout sessions lined up. We have Exhibit Hall is open from 12 to 2:15 for lunch. So please make plans to visit the Exhibit Hall, get you a bite to eat, 12 to 2:15. And then the Exhibit Hall reception is from 3:50 to 5:30, which you really shouldn't miss because that's a great opportunity to not only meet new friends, vendors, associates, but also we're going to be giving some free American Express cash away and free drink tickets. Please be sure to drop by Huawei to get your free drink tickets. They're a sponsor of the drink effort tonight. There should be a red balloon up there. Also mention that we have our Passport to Prizes program. The mobile app, the business card drawing is actually later this afternoon in the exhibit hall. We've got some phenomenal prizes being given away on the Passport for Prizes. We're going to give over $1,000 away in prizes on the other events that we talked about. Again, our sponsors, please thank Ericsson, Huawei, Interop Technologies, Nokia, Sprint, T-Mobile, and TNS. And we hope you have a productive day, and I hope you got something out of this morning's session. I know I did. So see you tonight at the exhibit hall. Thank you.